Hello everyone, I'm Grandmaster Denes Boros, and today I'm going to continue the series of how you can win a chess game without actually really using tricks and mostly emphasizing on positional play. So let's take a look. This has been played recently. I was playing white and I actually chose something that someone could consider unambitious, but in fact is just a slower type of play. It's not your tall-like attack where you run your opponent down. People anticipate that, but with slow-moving maneuvering games where you kind of position your pieces for a longer battle, that's a completely different mind game. So let's continue on. Knight c6, knight f3. So I am kind of hinting at gaining center control with d4, although I'm not doing just yet. My opponent reacts with g6, even though plenty of other moves are good here. Knight f6, d6, they're all playable. My opponent chooses g6, and I chose a3. Now you might be wondering why I didn't play d4. Obviously, objectively, the move d4 is the best, transposing into the dragon variation, which actually you can check out in previous videos. But in this game I felt like playing a slower game, and I choose to keep the position closed. So I'm not opening it up with d4, but creating a potential outpost for my bishop on a2. Bishop g7, bishop b5. Obviously, I could have gone bishop c4 first, and immediately hide my bishop there, and it fires down on the f7 pawn. But I felt like putting some pressure on this knight. Now here my opponent makes a strategical error that I staunchly refused to punish. Here my opponent had to go knight d4, because any sort of trade in the middle would help black, as the c-pawn would roll closer to the center after the trade, and here black is more than okay. Instead, my opponent played knight f6, and this is not a bad mistake, but strategically somewhat dubious. I played castles, but from a strategical standpoint, I should have taken on c6, pawn takes, and then h3. You may be wondering, why not get this bishop out immediately? Well, in that case, black could trade off this very bad passive bishop on c8 for this knight, as it's pinning my queen. If I start with h3, that will never be possible, and after castles, I have the time to play d3. And that's actually the benefit of playing closed systems and not open ones. You have way more time to improve your coordination than when the open position is around. It's obviously much more time efficient. Like, you have to be on time not to make a blunder. Knight f6, I decided to castle, even though I do think taking would have been better. Castles, d3, castles, castles, d3, d6, h3. Same old idea. I'm just making sure that my opponent's piece on c8 does not move. And this is kind of the point of strategical chess. You're trying to aim of constricting and pushing back all the possible ways of playing for your opponent. I'm playing against this bishop on c8, and I'm trying to emphasize the fact that yes, maybe I didn't have the biggest of an advantage, but I have one pawn in the center and you don't. Queen b6, kind of enticing me to take, which obviously wouldn't be in my favor, so I decided to move here. And even if I would take, my opponent would of course take with the queen, keeping the pawn structure intact and avoiding the double pawns that I was referring to earlier. So bishop c4, not taking, and also kind of pointing that yes, this time not only your bishop is bad on c8, but your queen on b6. As there were no trades on c6, it really doesn't do much. a6, bishop g5. Well, if this was a live game and I was very young, I could go, oh no, my pawn. But of course, at this level, this trick does not work. Queen takes b2 actually runs to knight a4, and the queen, surprisingly enough, has no place to hide to, and if you take, I take back with the queen. Bishop g5. So did I make any big leaps forward in this game? Not so much. But I am playing against the fact that this queen on b6 is awkward. Let's say black goes bishop d7. I may actually consider going knight d5, hitting the queen and the knight at the same time. And if you trade, e takes d5, and once the knight moves, the e7 pawn drops. So with all these little moves, I'm trying to emphasize the fact that my opponent has been going in the wrong direction. Bishop g5, queen d8. Now, some people are very, very harsh on moving back and forth. It's usually not the greatest thing, but if your piece was really bad already, it sometimes is the lesser of evils. Queen d2, connecting the bishop and the queen, and Alfred and Frank. b5, bishop a2, bishop e6, hoping to get more control over the d5 square. So if I would take, ruin the structure, my opponent would get some good control over that square. So I decide to jump in with the knight instead, pressing on that knight and that pawn on e7. And now you can see that I accomplished a lot. I've got all my pieces organized, none of my pieces is loose, everyone is defended, and I've got this central square under firm control. Bishop takes d5, e takes d5, knight d4. A logical idea by my opponent here, however, here underestimates my little tricky move. And this is the moment I would advise you to pause the video, take a little bit of your time, and think what move you would play here. After this small pause, welcome back. Well, of course I considered taking, and let's say rook e1, and I would say I should be better. I've got the bishops, and even though it's somewhat of a close position, they still occupy important squares, and I have a target on e7, and if they go after my c2 pawn, I will easily defend it with bishop b3, and if push comes to shove, even pawn to a4. Case of a5, a4. But here I realized that this knight isn't as good as usually you get in the Sicilians because it doesn't really have any support. So I played knight h2 with the idea of chasing it away with c3. Of course, I couldn't go c3 earlier because they'd be a trade on f3 and I get a very ugly doubled pawn structure. So I go knight h2, queen d7, and when you realize that your opponent piece has barely any moves, so after c3 the knight can only go to f5, that's the moment I was thinking, possibly there could be a tactical solution. So even though I'm trying to be as positional as possible, so playing according to the principles of chess, if I can win a piece, I will win a piece. So again, this is the second moment. Try to think outside the box and find a way if you can trap this knight on d4. Here I played c3, knight f5, and g4. Not my favorite move. I would never on earth play g4 if not for the fact that this knight is trapped. Why not? Well, these pawns are there to protect my king on g1. They're the bodyguards. You need to have them around. However, in this case, this knight really has no place to run to, and it can't move back to its own pieces, therefore it's lost. Can't go back, of course, because c takes, and all these squares are protected as well. h6, attacking my bishop. So here I just had to figure out if I can force trade and then take the piece, and thankfully I have that. But how easy it is to mess up a winning position. If I go bishop f4, there is pawn to g5, and suddenly the knight escapes, and even if I take, takes, and at worst, my opponent will lose a pawn, but that's not as bad as losing a knight. So bishop takes f6. Now I have basically a double attack. I'm attacking the bishop and the knight at the same time. He takes, pawn takes, queen takes. Now once you win a piece, your second goal is to try to trade off pieces, but also to find a way to save your king for any potential harm. So I played queen e3 with the intention of defending these pawns on d3 and h3 and come closer to shield my king. g5, rook a e1. Well, I should never forget of involving my pieces. Rook e8, offering me to give up a queen for 2 rooks, which is advantageous, but in this situation, trades of queens, so simple means of trades is better. Queen g6, and this is the moment I was thinking, okay, I'm winning, but which one of my pieces is completely out of play? Well, it's clearly the bishop on a2, so I decided to play d4 with the sole intention of going bishop b1 and making a monster, a beast, to say of that a2 bishop. Queen c2, bishop b1, queen takes, queen f5. And when all is said and done, if you put your pieces to the best possible squares, you eventually succeed. And here my opponent resigned because there is no way of stopping queen h7 without any further material losses. So I really hope you enjoyed this mini lesson of how to play positional chess. Well, it's mostly about restricting your opponent's pieces and making sure your pieces are well coordinated. So if you have any questions, do let me know in the comments below. And if you liked it, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.